set it all up. So good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. And thank you, Ben, for joining us this evening. We've got this fantastic book, Aston Martin, which is out in a few weeks. And on a little housekeeping note, if you'd like to ask Ben any questions, would you please go into the Q&A or the chat button, and there will be an opportunity later on to ask questions. I'll be putting them to Ben on your behalf. Also tonight is very special because we're in collaboration with the Windsor Festival. So it's Chorleywood Bookshop and the Windsor Festival. So welcome to everyone in Windsor as well as Chorleywood and beyond. So this evening we're delighted that Niels Blythe is here to interview or be in conversation with Ben this evening. Niels was a correspondent and presenter for the BBC for over 20 years and Director of Communications at the Bank of England. And he lives in Chorleywood. So we're delighted that everyone's here this evening. So I'll hand you over to Niels now. So welcome, Ben and Niels. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to you all for joining.
Thanks, Cheryl. And as Cheryl would say, it is wonderful to have with us Ben Collins, former racing driver, the stuntman from numerous James Bond movies, also the man who was the Stig on Top Gear. We'll be hearing more about all those things, but he's also the author of a splendid new book which he has on screen behind him, Aston Martin, Made in Britain. We're going to come to that in a minute, but perhaps I can just start off, Ben, by talking a little bit about you. First of all, just give us a sense of how you first got into the world of fast cars. What attracted you to fast cars in the first place?
Well, actually, my first passion was for aircraft. From a young age, I was taken to air shows as a boy, and I was deeply impressed by these very noisy, fast jets, especially by the Vulcan bomber, which with that crackling in the air and just an unbelievable sense of power. So from a young age, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and that was quite a sort of all-out dream of mine from that time, up until the optician told me I had no chance. So that was quite an abrupt and blunt sort of stoppage on that career. But the love of aircraft definitely continued. And meanwhile, my father was absolutely, he was a pretty wild driver. He had worked his way up through the sort of the corporate ladder, going through different company cars. Company cars were always a topic of conversation and demonstration on a regular basis of what they could do. So I just loved that from the back seat. My mother less so, a lot of squealing from the front seat, but I really loved that, and we actually shared a lot of good times sort of through that. So growing up with him, cars were very much in focus, but for me, still, it really was quite dormant until my dad basically got me a tryout at Silverstone in a single-seater, and that is when it all came together. And as soon as I sat in the machine, saw all the gauges, it was very reminiscent of, I suppose, a fighter plane. It's a similar sort of feeling in a cockpit, very low to the ground. The sounds, the power of the engine, and off I went and immediately took to it. Loved the sensation of speed. Having grown up on a farm and abusing all the farm machinery from the quad bike to the trike and everything else I could get hold of, I suppose I had developed car control techniques that came out and found a useful outlet on the racetrack. So I managed to do, I took to the racetrack like a duck to water, and I was under the lap record for that car on the first day, which is always the first session. So there was some natural affinity, but it was uncontrolled, and that was the bit that took a bit longer. So my first season of racing was quite a bumpy ride, but a lot of fun.
And you ended up doing the Le Mans 24-hour race on a number of occasions. I can't even really imagine what that's like for a driver. Talk to us a little bit about racing at Le Mans over 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, if you love driving, which I do, and the car I rose to race, I went through the single-seater channel to get to Formula One. That was the goal. And the cars are increasingly powerful. So you end up with about 600 horsepower machine with lots of aerodynamics, creating lots of downforce. So similar to a Formula One. I then moved across to what's called Le Mans prototypes, and the top category at the time had an 800 horsepower, 850 horsepower Judd Formula One V10 engine with ear-splitting RPM, went up to about 11,500 RPM, and absolutely incredible sounding machine. It could do about 215 miles an hour around Le Mans. Acceleration was off the charts, and it was heavier but had more downforce and grip than an F1 car. Big, huge, fat, slick tires. So this thing was a real animal. No power steering. It was a manual transmission. So it was all go, and to drive it, by comparison to the sort of junior ranks I'd raced up to that point, where you could sort of drive 30, 40 minutes worth of lapping. This thing drained you of all energy within one lap. It was an absolute brawl. It just, the physical strength to hold on to the steering wheel with that much grip and downforce was something else. So that was a major adjustment, but it was a titanic challenge. A lot of 4 hours, a daily routine was 3-4 hours in the gym to manhandle that thing, but totally addictive. And so going to Le Mans, you're then racing for sort of between 3 and 4 hour stints. So you'll run until the car runs out of fuel, which is usually after about an hour. For tires and things like that, they tend to want to keep the driver in for at least 3 stints. And so you run for 3 hours, but you take breaks and you get to drive in the day and the night. And that's the really special parts of Le Mans, is that it still largely feels like a closed road, which most of it is. It's open to the public, the larger part of the track. And you get this amazing feeling of, I suppose, you're kind of stealing the streets for that time, with the white line disappearing down the middle of the car at huge speeds. So it feels like you should have the police in your tail, but you don't. So it's a wonderful privilege to get the road closed, and you race rain or shine. And I suppose the unique thing with Le Mans, you run at full speed, so foot to the floor for 85% of the lap. It's some of the highest speeds we get on any of the circuits in the world. Top speeds above 200 miles per hour, and lots of very high speed sequences. So there are high G moments, but you do get time to reflect because the straights are very long. So there are these sort of surreal moments when you're screaming down the Mulsanne straights. You go past the bar on the left, and you get people leering over the Armco with huge steins of beer, shouting their approval, and you get to soak it up and look at the Ferris wheel and all that sort of stuff. But only briefly, because you really have to stay in the zone for long periods of time. But I absolutely love it. It's a fantastic challenge. It's got an amazing heritage, and it's very anchored in British motorsport, and also in this book, because this story is 100 years in the making, and that was the days before, or just as Le Mans, the roads were being contained in a closed loop, as the speeds of the cars it rose over time.
Because in the very early days of racing, I mean, one of the stories you tell in your book is how in the very early days of racing, they used to race on open roads, but eventually that came to a halt because they were killing too many people as they raced around the roads of Europe. I mean, that's an extraordinary story in itself.
Yeah, there's a great book called 10 Years of Motors and Motor Racing by Charles Jarrett. And I've quoted some of his lines in this book. He writes beautifully and tells that time. It was turn of the century, 100 years ago, as man first set foot in an automobile from having gone, and it was switching from horses to cars, and all the antics that went with that, these sort of early pioneers, basically. And he raced in the Paris to Madrid race, which I think was the last one before it got shut down. But it was a huge spectator sport. They were racing over these massively long distances, and people turned out by the hundreds of thousands before TV broadcasts. They just wanted to see these things going. It was a sort of a huge event. But the cars would bow around the corner and suddenly see 200 spectators standing in the road, and it had pretty awful consequences. So logic took over, and they thought, right, we'll take the people out of the course, put them behind a barrier, and let the cars run free. And so that's the origin of, if you like, the Grand Prix racing and closed course racing.
Sounds a better way of doing it, I got to say. So we're going to come back to the book and so on in just a second. But just moving on from your racing career, of course, you then got into stunt driving, and you became the Stig. for Top Gear. Tell us about a couple of highlights of being the Stig.
Well, getting the job in the first place was a result. Top Gear obviously been going since the 70s, but it was very much reborn in the Clarkson and Andy Willman era, who produced the show. I'd seen it briefly on telly. I thought it looked like a lot of fun, and so my first day was an audition. But basically went to the track. Willman was there, our chief, or soon to be chief, with his stopwatch, looking very scruffy. The man was in desperate need of a belt. But it's sort of eccentric but brilliant mind that he had. But anyway, he wanted to see what my performance was like. So he had a Ford Focus for which he had a lap time with other drivers, which he didn't tell me what the time was. He showed me where the course went, this sort of figure of 8, and then without further ado, just produced his stopwatch and just said, go. And that was that. So I squealed off in the car and ran off a few of these timed laps from standing starts. And he sort of gruffly, said, "Is that it? Is that all you've got?" And I said, "Yep, that's as fast as I can go." No indication of whether that was good, bad, or indifferent. And I heard nothing from them for a few months, and I just presumed that things hadn't gone that well until I had a phone call saying, "Can you be at the track next week?" And whereupon I realised I'd been hired. So that was how it started. And over the period of time, the series grew from quite a small, humble beginnings, 2002, to a much bigger beast in the end. There's so many different stories, but I suppose one of the funny parts was the way the Stig character grew in that time. Became a sort of it was a national quest. Who is the Stig became a big deal. At least on Google, it was in the top 10 searches on Google. And it was just in front of what is the meaning of life for a while, but I think it always fell second or third to am I pregnant? So there are some things that are more important. But no, I really had a great time. I got to drive a whole catalogue of cars, every shape and size, which was a brilliant, give me an amazing data bank of experience to be able to compare and contrast different handling. Got to drive all these great Astons too and be able to evaluate them. And meet these wonderful these folks that we had coming in to drive the reasonably priced car, all different personalities, and I suppose with that,
because you had Nigel Mansell and Lewis Hamilton and all those people doing what was it, the reasonably priced car. You got them to drive the reasonably priced car and see if they could beat your time, if I remember. It was a while ago.
Yes. Well, actually, the easy part for a long time was that I never had a lap time. And that was all well and good until Nigel Mansell appeared, and they were all. It's quite funny. All these Formula One drivers were quite nervous, and Mansell was really reticent to get in the car, and he was circling around it and saying, "Oh, I didn't sign up for this, And I thought, given that you've got your helmet in your hand, I thought it looked like you had signed up for this, and he was really not sure. And it's only a front wheel drive. It's the sort of F list of a rental car category. It was a Suzuki Liana that we used. It was massively underpowered. It was nothing compared to the stuff he'd raced before. But I think the competitive nature gets hold of you, and he wanted to do well if he was going to do it. Anyway, he eventually got in and drove some very lurid amazing laps. Fantastic to watch him bring his typical style, which was really ballsy. Is probably the right word. He really grabbed it by the scruff of the neck and tortured the car until it did a very fast time. So that was great, and he was pleased. And then the following week, they said, "You need to go and beat his time because you're the Stig and you've got to set a faster time." And I thought, this isn't the script. This part of the show isn't scripted, so this will be interesting and no pressure. But I just about clipped his time, I think by, I can't remember, 3 or 4 tenths or something, which was, I suppose, a relief. I got to keep my job for a bit longer. And one by one, these other champions and best drivers in the world came down to drive this terrible car and try and beat my time. So, but I'm lucky. By the end of it, well, Lewis Hamilton, when he was there, it did rain, which didn't help him and did help.
He's always good in the wet, I thought.
He's good in the wet, but fortunately for me, he wasn't too good. So he was slower than my dry time. So my time held until I left the show, and then I can blame that on extra concrete being poured on the peripheral. So no, they've gone faster since, but one day I might get a chance to go back.
So I have to ask you this, but how much better at driving are you than Jeremy Clarkson?
Well, I mean, he has his own style. So I guess he's got a good style for television. You know, and he's got a lot of experience. But I mean, it was funny. We had all three of those guys. We did a 24-hour race, the Brick Car 24 hours at Silverstone. And prior to that, for once, I was tasked with giving them some training, and they had no choice. So Clarkson had to sit, you know, and take lessons. Although it didn't last very long, he kicked me out quite quickly, and took over the driving. And even though we were on the Grand Prix track at Silverstone, which, you know, I know extremely well, I was telling him the lines to take, and he was arguing. He was arguing where to turn in, where to apex. And I was shouting at him to shut up and do what he was told, because you just go into instructor mode regardless who you're talking to. But we had a laugh, and he insisted on his own lines, and in the end I thought, okay, and he kind of crunched through it in his own style. But all three of them did pretty well. For inexperienced racing drivers, I think we finished third in our class in a diesel BMW, and from memory I think I drove probably half the race for them, because it was quite foggy in the night. So I think I drove something like 6 hours straight or something ridiculous in the night to get us back on track. But it was a lot of fun. It was good fun watching them learn.
And since then, you've been the stunt driver on the last 4 James Bond films. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What's been your most memorable drive as James Bond?
So yeah, it's been amazing working on the Bond films, and I guess most memorable was being hired again in the first place. That's where it goes back to. And I was fortunate or unfortunate, however you look at it. I had a huge crash racing, broke 4 ribs, and I was unable to get back in the race car for a while. But within a week of that happening, I got a phone call to go and work on a Jerry Bruckheimer movie, which was National Treasure 2. So doubling Nicolas Cage, also sitting on the roof in what's called a pod car, where you drive. Basically, the actor is inside the car, but the steering and pedals are all disconnected from them and diverted up onto the roof, and you sit on the roof and you drive from there. So it feels quite ungainly, but you get used to it. And they build these things to be able to perform high speed and stunt maneuvers and everything. So that was my introduction. And from off the back of that was then hired to work on Quantum of Solace, which was my first Bond film, which was amazing. So that's where I suppose really developed an affinity with the modern Aston Martin, because the DBS was the sort of the main car in that chase, being chased by these Alfa Romeos around Lake Garda. 4 months in the making for 2.5 and nearly 3 minutes of film. Quite an incredible
4
thing.
months just to do that one sequence.
I think it was 3.5, something like that. Yeah, I had to delay my wedding in order to get on the set for that, and but it was absolutely worth it, because the attention to detail, the rehearsals that we did to sort of map out the streets that we were going to be doing this high octane chase on, because the idea was, I think Jason Bourne had really set that high level of intensity. Casino Royale came in with Daniel Craig, and I think responded and with the doubled down with the fight sequence. So the driving piece they wanted to do was meant to be extremely potent. And yeah, we had 9 Astons, I think, all of which got wrecked intentionally in the making of the film. And but we really got to test it to destruction. And early testing was to find out, were there any weaknesses in the car? And it was just unbreakable. And my experience of the Astons of the 80s is that they were occasionally, some of them had some 90s, I should say. They had a few fragile points. Certainly the car that my dad bought in 93, where the dashboard fell into his lap once. But in the post-Ford era, if you like, they really made them extremely robust, and that's continued to today. They've got a fantastic product. So yeah, the DBS, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the sound, the V12 engine echoing off the mountainside there, and the Italians absolutely loved it. It was just you felt like you're in the center of the universe. Whenever you drove the car onto set or anything like that, people just loved it. Just loved the look of the car and the sound.
And how does it work in practice? Are you actually on set at the same time as as Daniel Craig, or how do they do the cutting between him sort of being in the car and you actually doing the stunt driving?
So we shoot with 2 units basically. So you've got a main unit where that's where all the the main acting pieces and the script, if you like, is that's where they get stuck into that. And the second unit fills in with some of the action bits. And so the actors they will work on both parts of the set effectively. So yes, so we rub along, and Daniel comes in and gets heavily involved, and got to spend some time with him doing his training, and he spends weeks doing the fight sequences, and likewise with the driving, did lots of fun stuff, burning rubber and showing him the high speed driving and
But you are actually giving Daniel Craig driving tips.
That's about all I can give him. Yeah,
I was going to say, have you given him tips on making martinis, or how to gamble, or
you forget that there's so much gets thrown at these guys because there's it's at the end of the day it's a Bond movie, and Bond is this indestructible man, but none of us are really like that, and it's very easy to forget because they portray it so well on screen. But at the end of the day, there's a real person who's got to figure out wire work, jumping off of buildings, and skidding a car around with it's not something that people are born able to do necessarily. So yeah, we had a lot of fun doing that stuff, the evasive maneuvers, learning how to drift, throw a handbrake, turn, those sort of things, useful stuff. Yeah, a lot of fun.
And the new Bond movie, it's called No Time to Die, and it's out pretty shortly. And you've been doing the driving for that, haven't you? I know you can't say too much about it, but what can you tell us about the upcoming? Nothing at all. Okay. Has it got Aston Martins in it then?
It's got 4 Aston Martins in it. So they've announced that, which I think is pretty fantastic. I mean, it's particularly for Aston, and one of the things I was really excited about is that they've brought back at some point in the movie. There's the V8 that appeared in the Living Daylights. That makes a comeback, which is awesome because it's one of my favourite cars to look at. It's that really muscular car from the 80s. So that's pretty fantastic that's back in the show. It's a good spread. I mean, and with the DB5 that also is another star in the show. They did a lot of work because the original car, 1964, came out on Goldfinger and made that huge impact when that shot across the screen. It's an old car. It's quite heavy. It's slightly underpowered by modern standards. So they were able to, the special effects department. So Chris Coolbold heads that department, and has also been a director of some of the sequences. His team, the engineering genius behind that, I suppose you would call them the real Q branch, if you like. They can pretty much make anything, give them enough time and a bit of scope. And between them and the team at Aston Martin, they basically created a stunt version of the DB5, so a lightened version with more power, that was incredibly dynamic, that they were able to use for some of that sequence. So yeah, absolutely wonderful bit of kit, and I think in the trailer you get a sense of what that's like.
Because those 2 brands, the whole the James Bond brand, if you like, and the Aston Martin brand, they're very, very intertwined, aren't they? What's the history of that? I suppose my memory goes back to the DB5. In fact, I was one of those kids who had the corgi toy with the ejector seat and all the rest of it, was that the first Aston Martin to appear in a James Bond film, or had there been Aston Martins before that?
So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the first one, and I'm fairly 100% sure. I was fascinated by the origin story of how Aston Martin became linked with it, and obviously Ian Fleming wrote the stories and his involvement too. So I've gone right back to the beginning of that, and I suppose to praise it, I thought it was wonderful. There's some fantastic personalities through the history of Aston, from the very beginning with Lionel Martin, the founder, who very early on in the life of the company was already facing the financial difficulty of producing a sort of bespoke machine and making any money out of it. So fortunately, this very eccentric and fantastic personality called Louis Zabrowski, Count Louis, he was one of the wealthiest chaps in the world, a young man who loved cars. And he'd already bought himself the engine from a German Zeppelin after post-World War One, the chassis of a truck, and he'd mated the two together to create Chitty Bang Bang. Brooklands had been sort of just recently built, and they were testing these cars and racing them at very high speeds for the day, I think around sort of 88, 90 miles an hour. And it was in one of these sort of jaunts that Zabrowski was speeding past on one of the pieces of banking. The car took off on one of the bumps, and a little boy was there to watch this moment, and that boy was Ian Fleming. And that memory stuck with him for decades until he was able to put pen to paper and write the story of the flying car. So he immortalized that moment. I think it's pretty wonderful. And Zabrowski got linked up with Lionel Martin, helped part finance the business to take development of the car to the next stage, and then entered them in the Grand Prix of Strasbourg in the mid-20s. And off they went, and they ran in the top 6, which was pretty incredible, given that the French had dominated it in the early year. French and Italians were really dominating, and they were underpowered and all that. But what set Aston Martin apart was that they had beautiful handling. They were lightweight, and they were able to really drive the wheels off them. And in that particular race, it was a wet race, and he did very well. So I've forgotten where we started with that question, but yes,
we were talking about the way that James Bond and Aston Martin have gone together. But actually, I'd forgotten that Ian Fleming wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
And produced by Eon, who also make the Bond movies. So in fact, it's great if you watch. I can't remember his name now, but the man who plays Goldfinger is also the evil king in Chitty Bang Bang. Desmond Llewellyn, who plays Q, is also in Chitty Bang Bang. So there's a lot of crossover. But yes, back to how it all links together. So there was, I suppose, a moment when Ian Fleming might have been aware of Aston Martin in the early days, but the early Bond books were Bond drove a Bentley. And there was a bit of lobbying from Aston Martin Owners Club, I think, wrote a letter to him, sort of suggesting he put him in a lighter, faster car. But basically, the legend has it that an airman called Cunliffe Lister, who lived near Ian Fleming, basically had got this DB24 Mark III that he was using for rallying. It had lots of gadgets inside it, and it had all kinds of little secret compartments for holding tools and stuff like that. And Ian Fleming saw all the gadgetry and also admired the shape of the car, and so put Bond in an Aston in the book. But I think he called it a DB3. Mm-hmm. So that was in book form. Then, of course, it had to translate across into the films and get in there. So that was Goldfinger. And they made the approach, and the deal was done. So that was Cubby Broccoli who came up with that, and they got the DB5 into the first for its first session as a Bond car.
So we've gotten ahead of ourselves slightly in the history of Aston Martin. So you've talked a little bit about the early days, and then there's a very kind of formative period, isn't there, sort of after the Second World War, when the company is owned by a man called David Brown. And I think David Brown is the DB of DB5, DB6, and is that right? And
that's right. Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about the David Brown era.
So, like I said, there's so many amazing personalities, and David Brown, no exception. As a young boy, he was the second generation, if you like, of heavy industry up in Yorkshire, and his father had very high expectations of what his son would do, what he would not do, and he was not to get involved with car engineering of any sorts. He was meant to take over running the factories that they had that made these very high tech gears for huge gears, small gears, you name it. And but David Brown had other ideas, and as a schoolboy, he designed his own engine, cast it himself. In his room when his dad wasn't watching, and his dad was apoplectic with rage when he caught him out. But it didn't put him off. He got into a little bit of racing himself. And whilst running, as he got older, he became general manager at David Brown Gears. he post World War II. So I've jumped ahead by mistake. During World War II, the company was heavily involved with the war efforts, manufacturing all kinds of stuff. But critically, they built the gearboxes for the Spitfire. The Germans had bombed every other factory that was manufacturing those components, and David Brown's was the last one running, and he kept it running night and day. They were working shifts and making these things absolutely flawlessly, so they were reliable as well as punctual, and kept the Spitfire in the air during the Battle of Britain. So they really have a story to tell. So I enjoyed relaying that and the other parts of what he got up to at that time. But post World War II, there was opportunity because Lagonda came up for sale, as did Aston Martin, and he bought one company after the other. So Aston Martin came first. They'd sort of run out of funds, even though they had a great product. He drove this car that was a bit of an ugly duckling called the Atom that they'd been designing pre-war and testing and developing during the war years. He had a test drive in it, and it was pivotal because based on his impressions, he bought the company, and then was still looking for the right engine to put in that car. And he knew that Bentley was working at Lagonda, that they had a 6-cylinder engine that was it was stillborn in a way. It didn't have a car to go into. So he bought Lagonda, put the two together. And so those early cars were the best of both worlds in a way. We had Bentley's genius for producing a lightweight, powerful engine in the back of a chassis that was a really proven and tried and tested model. So that's how it happened. So that was in the DB2, I think, is where that came to fruition. But yes, so DB, David Brown, and he took the business onto its next leg of the journey for a critical period.
And there was, and of course, it got royal patronage, didn't it? I think Prince Charles for a while was driving. Was it a DB5 or one of those cars? Anyway, I think Aston Martin got a royal warrant, didn't they, from Charles?
I've got a feeling he had a DB4, but someone with better knowledge will shoot me down. But I think he still owns an Aston. So yeah, I mean, they were very looking cars.
Yeah, no, beautiful, beautiful things. And just moving more to the modern era, one of the other key characters, I think, was Adrian Newey, the very, very well-known designer from Formula One. Just talk about Adrian Newey's involvement.
Well, much more recently, yes, there have been a lot of big changes. So through the Ford years, where the manufacturing side improved rapidly because they went from being these handmade, bespoke models to being able to produce in volume, which I think was critical for that. So that was Nick Fry and co who came in to sort of take over that production piece. That sort of put them back on the map. You know, the DB7 brought them into the modern era. But latterly, there's been more of an involvement from Mercedes. So I think Mercedes now owns 15% of the company, and they've been looking into ways to, I suppose, modernize and streamline further how they make the cars. Adrian is well known as being a genius of modern motorsports. And someone told me a great story about him in the way that he'll draw still by hand, which is, I think, quite rare these days. I mean, they use CAD, obviously computer-aided design, to design the shape. But the initial things he'll draw, and I think he's within, I can't remember, less than a percentage point of the final design is pretty much replicated by hand. So he can visualize airflow, which I think that's another mark of just sheer experience. But I think it's wonderful. They've deployed his mind to produce the sort of ultimate hypercar, if you like. So the Valkyrie is the project, and he's really masterminding, which I think comes out this year or early next year. And having seen it being built at the factory, it's a really incredible piece of kit. I think it's 1,200 horsepower from a V12 engine. It probably will be the most powerful naturally aspirated engine ever made, which is being bolted into this car because that's what he wanted. It's every part of the car is pretty much stressed. It's a monocoque. It's sort of every part of it is crafted almost seamlessly from chassis into the aerodynamics. So the whole thing looks like a very complicated wing. I still haven't driven it, but I've ogled it from afar, and I'm trying sometime try and steal the keys to get in there.
Well, I'm sure that they can get one into a James Bond movie, and you can write it off, Ben.
I probably won't be allowed to write that one off. It's a bit expensive, but yeah.
So, talking of write-offs, I mean, I guess, Aston Martin, although it has this kind of glorious engineering and design history, has got a pretty checkered business history. I mean, there have been lots and lots of financial collapses, lots of investors have lost money, actually even relatively recently. Where's Aston Martin at now in terms of the business, in terms of the cars that they are producing?
Well, so going from the DB7 time of a couple of decades back, it's they've really, I think, perfected the reliability of the car. So you've got something that's extremely balanced. Nobody really can touch them for a drivable car that's even though it's got the performance, it's relaxing to drive, and those are the sort of, I suppose, key tenets of the design philosophy. Again, going back to Ian Callum, and although he's no longer at Aston's, they've continued in that vein basically. Although they produce some very aggressive models, so the new Vantage is very, very cheeky, very fast. Unbelievably high levels of grip. So when they actually took these cars on at Silverstone to use them as track cars, they just didn't modify it. They just put tyres on them and let people go around. And if you were to criticise it, it's because it creates too much grip. So you get people who don't necessarily have much experience cornering at very high speeds because they're really easy to get to grips with quite quickly, and they're quite forgiving. Then you've got the sort of the more brutish DBS Superleggera, which is extremely powerful. They've now gotten more into the sort of turbocharging side of things. Quite seamless though, not like the old days of the turbo lag. So it's very progressive. So they're really they've got the best of both worlds. So if you want to I suppose really have that thrill of something that's got extreme capability, then you've got things like the Superleggera DBS, and you've also got the smaller version with the Vantage, and these wild track machines that they've created the Vulcan, which is just one of the best cars you could ever get hold of. It's a track only car with 800 odd horsepower and lots of control mechanisms to control the speed and the braking and the acceleration, but wonderfully balanced. And very, very I think what's amazing is that they've got such an array of very, very different projects, but they've managed to see them all through extremely well, including the new one, the DBX, which is an SUV. So this is their first time doing an SUV. So Lamborghini and Bentley and everybody else has been doing SUVs, and SUV is nothing new to most of us who are aware of them, but Aston are coming into it quite late. And the benefit of that is they've been able to test and assess what everybody else has got. Porsche, I think, set the bar very high with things like the Macan, but they've been able to look at this, pick it apart, and say, right, okay, well, we're going to have this much storage space, and we'll have this much capability and this much performance to create that. And their sales book is very full. So hopefully for them, they're in a good place. And although the share price has come down, apparently when Ferrari floated for the first time on the stock market, it crashed as well. And then quadrupled in value. So hopefully for anybody that's been buying shares in Aston, they'll have the same upside to their investment.
So here's a sort of a two-part question. First of all, do you own an Aston Martin at the moment? And second question, if Aston Martin were to say to you, okay, well, we love the book so much, Ben, that you can have any of the cars that we make at the moment, what would you go for?
Well, I've got a few Astons, but they are only sort of Hot Wheels size, so about 2 inches long. I have to say, I think that the Vantage is a really stunning car visually, and I'm very spoiled because I get to drive these things all the time. I was taking my son to his rugby match, and one of the parents cruised in smugly in this gorgeous sort of olive metallic green or dark olive metallic green Vantage, and I found myself really ogling this thing for far too long. Just absolutely, they are beautiful, and equally they perform. So I suppose and actually that's if you can use the word, it's the cheapest in the range. Not really though, because it's still six figures, but I think that's probably the one I go for. So if I can, maybe that's a nice deal. If I could give them 50 books in exchange for one of those, that would work quite nicely.
Yeah. If you could cut me in on that deal as well, Ben.
Broker it, that'd be even better.
So I guess we're going to have to wrap up in a second, because I think there have been some questions coming in, and I want Cheryl to have a chance to put some of the audience questions to you. But you've told a lot of absolutely fantastic stories about Aston Martin. Is there one more story that you want to tell while we've got a couple of minutes before we go over to audience questions? Is there one fabulous Aston Martin story to leave us with?
Gosh, what to say?
Well, those open-ended questions are very difficult. So I tell you what, while you have a think about it, maybe we'll open it up to Cheryl, and she can put some audience questions to you. And if on the back of those there's a story that's kind of burning in your head to tell, add it into your answer. How about that?
That's good.
Okay, Cheryl, welcome back.
Okay, hello. Okay, so something here from Kathy, who says, I'm a woman who knows nothing about cars and even less about car maintenance. But at 58, I feel I'm ready for a midlife crisis. What sort of sports car would you recommend I buy?
Well, I'd get the Vantage, definitely. That's, depends what your budget is, of course. Hopefully, Kathy, you've really, you've been saving up all those years, and you're ready to take the plunge and really, really blow it. So if you want to put a big dent in your wallet, go and get a Vantage.
I'm sure our budget doesn't stretch that far.
Okay. Well, okay. So if we're looking for something more affordable, you can get some amazing MGs. I suppose some of the older cars like that. I guess it depends. But what I need more information. I'll have to get a price bracket.
Those of us, Ben, who've never really sort of ogled these things, what's the entry price for an Aston Martin? What does a Vantage cost? What does the cheapest new Aston Martin cost, roughly?
Yeah, I think it's about 120k for a Vantage. I think that's a rough starting point. But of course, there's the second-hand market, so you can get involved with that. Anything Aston, I think, if you can get it for an approved dealer, you can get the warranty on there as well, then you reduce your risks of having something, or if you have a problem, you can always get it sorted. So that would be my main advice. Whatever you buy, get it from an approved dealer, so that you've got that insurance policy in your back pocket.
Okay, something from Thomas here. Hi Ben, may I ask what is your favourite classic car and why?
Well, I've got a Land Rover, which I'm really in love with. It's not even that old, but maybe it's a modern classic, but it's 1998. I love it because it's just completely simple. It doesn't beep at me. It doesn't try and tell me what to do. It's got a real hydraulic powered steering wheel. It's not electronic. It's not fly by wire. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a brute, and it's very good off road. And I think sometimes simple is best. So I love that. But I've got so many old cars that I love, but the one I know best and closest is that one.
And one for me. Have you ever been caught speeding?
I have.
Points on your license.
I was much younger then, though, but these days I'm a law-abiding citizen with 0 points. So I save it for the track.
So the points have gone.
The key thing, Ben, you didn't ask somebody else to take the points on their license, because that has been career-ending for a few people, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, that's not my style.
No, that's right. You want to be known as the fast driver, don't you? You want to pass that on or on. So, say you have £5,000 to spend on a car. What would you buy?
Oh my God! What can you get?
Other end of the market.
Yeah. Well, what you don't want is to have a car that breaks. I suppose. What can you get? When I was younger, the car I had for a long time was an Audi A3, and that was a real pocket rocket. So there's the A3, which is pretty amazing, and you can get in a very similar car is the Seat Ibiza, which is pretty much the same car, but without the quite as posh a brand. So you get all the good handling, but for a lot less money. And I think second hand, you can probably get some good deals on those and have a lot of fun.
That's good. So what was your most satisfying result when you were racing? When you were your racing days?
Well, weirdly, the one I remember the most, even though we didn't even finish, was my first Le Mans. And it was more because that was my first big race on the major stage. And it was monsoon conditions. It was absolutely pelting with rain. It rained for 17 hours out of the 24. And I had a big long stint in the night where we were a lap down. I think we were running in 16th place, and I managed to unlap myself, get past the leaders and start catching them, which was great. And we were the fastest car on the track for 4 hours. So weirdly, that's I suppose is one of my favourite memories, because we really showed what we could do. And it was, you don't know how you measure up against the best in the world until it happens. And there were lots of F1 drivers on that grid. And I remember splashing past in a huge puddle, overtaking Mark Blundell, who I'd watched racing a Tyrrell and things like this on television, at the Grand Prix of years before. I recognised the helmet and just thought it was a very surreal moment at sort of 3 a.m, passing one of the icons of the sports in real time. It was something to get used to. But anyway, it was an amazing few seasons racing for Ascari.
Okay. Another question's come in. Hi, Ben. Thanks for the talk. How do you see Aston Martin addressing environmental issues and deliver lower carbon products?
It's really interesting, this, because you would think from all the backlash that car makers weren't doing anything. So I come from the other side of it. I feel a bit, I feel for them, because they've invested so heavily in reducing emissions and creating more efficient engines. So all of the car makers have been at it doing that. I know there was Dieselgate and things like this, which has I think just destroyed people's trust. But that's not all car makers. So with Aston, they absolutely have got more efficient engines, and so we're way ahead of where cars were in the 90s. Let alone if you look at the 70s, it's just a million miles different. And they're starting to look into things like electric. So when I was up at the Heritage, or up at the centre at Newport Pagnell, they've got, I think, I'll get this wrong now, but it's in my book, so I should remember. But I think it was a DB4 with an electric motor in it. Quite easy to do now. So there are I think, signs that the future's coming to us quicker than you would think. And I think now that many more manufacturers are jumping into electric, it won't be long before Aston are there as well. Plus, I think the Adrian Newey's machine is harnessing electric energy as well. So they're there, getting there.
And go back to the book. How long did it take you to write?
Ages. So it was really fun. Obviously, I've driven them over the years from Top Gear and in the movies, but that doesn't tell the story of the company or the people. So I had a lot to learn, and fortunately, a lot of people gave their time. So I really got to enjoy doing a bunch of interviews. I've got these great stories about Jackie Stewart in his work there, through other people I spoke to put together the big picture. I went to Aston Martin's Heritage Trust, got a load of the race reports from Stirling Moss era, and just ripped into those to get source information, because I wanted to bring something new that hadn't been written about before. Went to the RAC Club, who kindly let me into their library to again get into these books, and I just sourced as much information as I could, book-wise and otherwise. So I had a really good pool to research from. So research-wise was about 3-4 months, probably longer than that, if I'm honest with myself. And then to actually write it, I'll look at my wall. Hang on. It was a month and a half. But I had it by that stage. It was staged in my head, but I was running out of time because it had taken me, longer to get the research done. So I had to just put a target on the wall and lock myself away until I'd done 1,500 words a day until I had it done.
That's not that long. Month and a half.
Yeah. No.
That's really good.
Well,
I think that's really impressive, actually. I've actually just been sort of leafing through the book while you were talking about it. But you've got some great photographs in there as well. There's a photograph, for example, from 1922 of Lionel Martin himself having his car filled up at the French Grand Prix in Strasbourg in 1922. Where did you get the pictures from?
Oh gosh, all over. But there's Clement Tasky is one of the main photographers of that era, and he's got an incredible archive, and so they very kindly let us license some of the images from there. One of my favourite pictures is, I think it's Peter Collins, sadly not related to me, being vaulted through the air by one of his mates. This is when they were racing at Le Mans, and they had about 9 or 12 naughty racing drivers under one roof at the hotel. And they would get up to all these hijinks and, play pranks on each other and do play fights and get drunk after the race and stuff like this. So it was a case of decanting which bits to put in. But photos-wise, it was difficult because you can only fit so many in. But there's some real corkers. But hopefully we've distilled a good selection to have a good bit of fun with.
So in the end, did you have more material? Much more material, and you had to sort of do a big cull to choose really, good photos.
Photos, yes, absolutely.
And for the words, was there a lot of, you did all this research? Was there sort of, this desire to put it all in, but you had to sort of cull it a bit?
Funnily enough, it did come to the right number without things being too brutalized and cut out. But it was a balancing act because 100 years is a long time. So you've got to pick how much do you focus on all of it. It can't all go in. But I think that by focusing on the big personalities and taking that as the dominant factor in the book, that definitely helped. And in each era, there was always 1, 2, 3, 4 fascinating people getting up to stuff and picking out those anecdotes. I had me howling with laughter. I was sharing a room with my daughter who was doing her Zoom classes and shrieking with laughter at these some of these stories. So I hope people find them as at least as funny as I did, even if my daughter didn't appreciate the interruptions.
There is a particular one about liquid nitrogen, and is that one that you can tell in front of a family audience?
I think so. So this is the Louis Zabrowski era. So everything was experimental, I suppose, and because nobody even knew what shape or size a car should be back in the early days. Hence Chitty Bang Bang. But they were getting heavily involved with racing. Clive Gallo had come out of World War I. He was a flying ace during that time, and basically he and Louis were up to all sorts of antics of tuning cars and getting Chitty Bang Bang ready for the track, and as well as the Aston Martins that they took to Strasbourg. When one night came calling a driver that they didn't like, apparently, with the unstated intention of staying the night because he had a packed bag with him, and Louis was holding one of his big banquets up at his stately mansion in Kent. So they reluctantly let him in, but it sort of stuck in the craw, and one or both of them shuffled off to their workshop where they used to keep all their gear, and appeared with a little pot of liquid nitrogen, which they shuffled underneath this man's chair. So as the evening went on and the drink was flowing, this gentleman felt a tingling in his nether regions and became more of a burning sensation, and went to the loo to have a look at what was going on downstairs. And on looking at the sort of frosty wonderland between his legs, looked on in horror, jumped in, poured some scalding water and jumped in, and there was a scream heard from the bathroom, and that was the end of his evening. So that's how they dealt with him.
Thomas has come back to us and said, "Hello, Ben. Thank you for your answer to my previous question. Very interesting to hear. Could I also ask how, did you find the whole process of writing the book difficult? And what is your favourite classic sports car?"
Well, I love writing, and I suppose once you've rounded on how you're going to do it, then it starts to flow a bit. But the difficult part was figuring out where to really focus it, and because I suppose I was naturally thinking, gosh, how much company history, corporate history should there be I decided not too much. How much nuts and bolts and geometry angles should be in there, I thought not too much either. So I thought once I got the balance right and decided to focus on people, it was a lot easier, and just really enjoy the stories. That's what it's about. It's telling those stories. So then it was a case of weaving their biographies together, which happens organically because that's what happened in real life. But yes, there was definitely a process of selection, which was tough, especially when I was going through these big volumes, and there's people have written some amazing technical studies of Aston Martin, and so I've listed those at the back in the bibliography if you want to go in depth and know every single component of how these cars are put together. Better minds for that have written those books already. So, but this is something different, and I wanted it to be fresh. Hence the interviews, and actually the interviews really also brought the spirit of the company to life for me, and I really enjoyed listening to those back. So from David Brabham, Darren Turner, the guys that are racing them still today, to Nick Fry, who was leading light in the 90s and got to tell me all those great stories about Jackie Stewart, Ian Callum and others. So that was quite living history. So that was really good. And your other question, favourite classic sports car? There's quite a few. I mean, and how old is classic? Funny enough, there's one car that's worth mentioning, which is making a comeback, and it is, I suppose, a classic car. They only made one of them, but the Bulldog, which was this a supercar built in 1978, only one made by William Towns, and it really predated the McLaren F1. It was capable of 200 miles per hour. When I was doing the research, this car was lost apparently, but I could see that the guys at Aston were slightly reticent about this and didn't want to tell me too much. But there's been an announcement, I think, in the last couple of weeks that the Bulldog, which was this amazing wedge-shaped car, really futuristic looking, has been found and is being restored. And I think in 18 months, it'll be driving again. So that's a good one to pick as a favourite. And it's a good way of trying to reel them in to see if they'll let me have a drive of it when it's ready.
I'm sure they will. So, Ben, what's next? Another book? What's the immediate and the long-term future hold for you?
Well, definitely, I want to obviously give my book a great send-off. So, thank you for doing this, and that's I'm delighted people are interested in it. So, I've got some fun TV interviews coming up to sort of express some enthusiasm for that and get people interested in the book. And then the next thing
Are you going on to Top Gear?
I should try that. Yeah, I should sneak in and just take the keys. So I might give that a go. Yeah, well, we're back to filming again, which is great. So obviously lockdown has put paid to much filming of cars going around corners and things, and Marvel movies and all these kind of things are coming back. So hopefully that side will be kicking in again before Christmas. But I'm not exactly sure what I'll be up to next. So we'll wait and see.
No, wait and see. Well, I hope in the future, maybe next year, you'll actually come to Chorleywood in the flesh, because it'd be great to see you again in Chorleywood.
I'd love to, absolutely, and sign some books for people and have some fun.
Yeah, absolutely, sort of to meet you, because this is great. But obviously, people are really keen to meet you. Yeah. And the book isn't actually published till the 16th of this month.
15th of October, so you can pre-order. There's signed copies on Blakewell's, I think.
No.
Oh gosh, sorry. The signed copies are yours.
Thank you, Ben.
I'm so sorry.
It was all going so well, wasn't it?
I'm really sorry. That's shocking. Oh, just shoot me now.
No, I will later. No, anyway, we'll have signed copies here at Chorleywood Bookshop. And what I was going to say is, what a great Christmas present for.
Yeah, absolutely. A rattling good read, I'd say. Rattling good read.
So you're lucky to get an advanced copy then.
Yeah, I feel very proud.
Yeah, we haven't got our copies in yet because it's not yet published. So anyway, Neil, thank you so much for guiding us through this evening. And Ben, wonderful to see you, to meet you again. And let's see you back in Chorleywood. And I wish you all the very success with the book. Great success with the book.
And I'll make sure that we get the first copies to you, okay, so that we've get published that for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, Ben, all the very best.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you soon.